Today we explore the life, times and campaigns of Sgt Frederick Crack, a Royal Engineer whose cutting-edge unit pioneered technological breakthroughs for the British Army. We globetrot with Crack and his outfit, from campaigning with Crealock's trawlers in Zululand to being under fire in Egypt and ballooning in Botswana. So I was approached by someone who had inherited a medal set from a relative who was a collector. The medals originally belonged to a Royal Engineer, Sgt Frederick Crack, and had a bundle of research papers along with them. I was asked to make sense of it all, as this person didn't know where to start. Having the medal research already collated is really exciting, as we can immediately begin to connect the dots and map out a journey of this man's life. Frederick Edward Crack was born around the year 1859 in the village of Horringer, near Bury St Edwards in Suffolk. Frederick was the son of James and Anne Crack, and although there is not much in the way of details about his early background, we know he was the eldest of 5 children. Frederick's occupation before joining the army was as a groom caring for horses. By today's standards, Fred was a small man standing at 5 foot 5 inches when he enlisted in the Royal Engineers at the age of 19. Fred had blue eyes and brown hair with a complexion described as fresh. We know his chest size was 35 inches. He had no distinctive physical marks and also no smallpox marks, and had been vaccinated at infancy. After passing a medical examination in June 1878, he was administered for the oath of attestation for the army in Aldershot on the 9th of July 1878. With all the details of his enlistment out the way, Fred was first assigned as a driver to the Royal Engineer Depot at Aldershot. His regimental number was 15670, and he spent time conducting his basic training in the skills of a soldier and of his specialism as a driver at the Royal School of Military Engineers, known as Brompton Barracks in Chatham. Fred was then posted to C Troop Royal Engineers. Under the command of Major A.C. Hamilton, the troop was founded in 1870 and were a cutting-edge outfit. It was the first formal professional body of signallers in the British Army, and its duty was to provide communications for a field army by means of visual signalling, mounted orderlies, and telegraph. In 1871, its strength was reported as 5 officers and 133 other ranks. This unit was the forerunner of the Royal Signals. The Anglo-Zulu War would be C Troop's first action and test of its capabilities. After the initial British invasion of Zululand in January 1879 and stunning defeat at Isandlwana, the British commander Lt Chelmsford called for urgent reinforcements from Britain and specifically requested C Troop to assist with his issue with communications. As an aside, for anyone interested in Zulu history and Rorke's Drift, Lt Chard was a Royal Engineer.
This is Lt Chard's revolver, his water bottle, and his sword that we used during the Battle of Rorke's Drift. Amazing.
C Troop deployed to South Africa at half strength with 5 officers, 172 other ranks including Fred, 109 horses and 13 wagons. Fred and the company arrived in Natal on the 3rd of April 1879. During the voyage, the company lost 27 horses, about a quarter of their total number, as a result of storms. With reinforcements flooding in from across the Empire, in May 1879, Lt Chelmsford planned his second invasion of Zululand. This time it was a 2-pronged approach. The main thrust would come from the flying column, led by Colonel Evelyn Wood, and the 2nd Division, commanded by Major General Edward Newdigate, who were tasked with advancing towards the Zulu capital, Ulundi, from different directions and to converge and defeat the Zulu forces. Composed of veterans, the flying column provided rapid, mobile support, while the 2nd Division moved more methodically, establishing fortified positions along their route towards Ulundi. The second part of the 2-pronged approach, composed of the 1st Division, under Major General H. Crealock, located near the coast. This was designed to advance along the coast, targeting local settlements and tribal leaders, and act as a diversion. It was hoped that this would force the Zulus to divide their forces in order to protect the coastal communities. On 17th of June, Crealock's force began the 1st Division's start of the second invasion of Zululand. The British had learned from their mistakes during the first invasion, and slowly and methodically advanced into Zululand, building forts and blockhouses along the way to guard their advance. The majority of Sea Troop were attached to the 1st Division by the coast, which due to their slow progress was soon known as Crealock's Crawlers. The unhealthy climate of the coast would lead to outbreaks of disease such as typhoid and dysentery. Although their main task was to lay telephone cables on the line of advance, Sea Troop were unable to take sufficient telegraph cable due to the distances involved. They had only packed around 30 miles of cables, but needed at least 80 miles. The lines of communication were also plagued by grass fires which damaged the cables, as well as rampaging cattle which knocked down the telegraph poles. Many soldiers in Sea Troop had to quickly improvise and learn the heliograph. Their main task was sending messages back and forth along the lines of communication between the main forts built by the British on their advance along the coast. The main locations were Fort Pearson, Fort Crealock and Fort Chelmsford, with Port Durnford a crucial location to offload supplies from the sea. For the first time in the British Army, a telephone was used in operations. Although carrying out essential work, Sea Troop, along with the rest of the 1st Division, saw little action or glory, which was mostly claimed by the Flying Column and 2nd Division at Ulundi. Fred remained in country until 27th of January 1880, when, with the Zulu War wrapped up, he was sent back home along with his comrades on the hired transport ship SS Galatea. On the journey, a typhoid outbreak occurred on the ship. In 1881, Fred went on a telegraphy course, changing his speciality from driver to signaller, and was promoted to Lance Corporal. In the national census of that year, Fred's address is listed as the School of Military Engineering at Brompton Barracks. Just over a year later, Sea Troop and Fred were back in action, with the Anglo-Egyptian War of 1882 breaking out. Internal unrest in Egypt had forced the British to intervene to protect British interests as well as the Suez Canal. Fred saw action at the battles of Kassassin and Tel Kebir. The Battle of Kassassin took place on August 28, 1882. The British forces, led by Sir Garnet Wolseley, were attacked by Egyptian troops under Ahmed Arabi Pasha at the Sweetwater Canal. The British managed to repel the Egyptian attack, thanks in part to the moonlight charge by the Household Cavalry, which played a crucial role in the British defence. During this battle, the Royal Engineers, who were tasked with improving and maintaining a defensive position along the Sweetwater Canal, came under fire. This battle was significant as it helped secure the British position in Egypt and paved the way for their advance towards the more decisive Battle of Tel Kebir. This would open the route towards Cairo. The night before the Battle of Tel Kebir, Sea Troop were tasked with heading off into the desert, the first men of Wolseley's army with a special mission to do. Under the direction of a Major Fraser, they had to lay a line of telegraph poles as markers for over 2 miles across the sands in no man's land. This would guide troops to set positions during a night march, so the army would be in position and ready for battle by morning. Others in the troop set up a telegraph line so that British commanders could communicate with each other. During the actual battle, Sea Troop was part of the reserve and apparently acted as a bodyguard to the Commander-in-Chief, Lord Wolseley himself. After the battle, Fred's unit sent the first ever victory signal by telegraph to come direct from a battlefield. Fred spent 93 days on campaign in Egypt from the 9th of August until the 20th of October, when he was posted back to the UK. This entitled him to an Egypt Medal with Tel Kebir clasp and a Khedive Star. As the medals jingled around when a soldier was on parade, the Khedive Star often clashed against the Egypt Medal, pitting the sides and causing damage. Many Egypt medals come without original damage. Back in the depot for just over 2 years, Fred was then deployed along with Sea Troop to Bechuanaland in 1884, arriving in South Africa on the 24th of November. The Bechuanaland Expedition, also known as the Warren Expedition, was a British military mission of 4,000 men led by Major General Charles Warren to assert British sovereignty over the Botswana country in modern-day Botswana. Part of the scramble for Africa, the British aimed to occupy the region to counter encroachments from Germany in nearby modern-day Namibia, as well as the Boer Republic of Transvaal, and to suppress any further land claims made by Boer freebooters. Two republics that the Boers tried to establish, known as Zululand and Goshen, were also dissolved during the expedition. Thus, the force successfully established British control without bloodshed. This expedition was remarkable in that this was the first time the Royal Engineers conducted a balloon experiment on operations, taking 3 aerial observation balloons. In many ways, this experiment with aerial weapons and technology was a forerunner of the Royal Air Force. A bit of background on ballooning. The British military began formal balloon training in 1880 and established a school of ballooning in Chatham, Kent. By 1883, the British had produced their first balloon that could lift an observer to a useful height. Gold beater skins were used for the balloon fabric. These were the outer layer of ox intestines. In typical dark humour used by the British military, a poem was composed at the time, mocking the lack of action, the lack of medals, and the boredom. Sea Troop gets a mention. Then there were the telegraphists, their poles all in a row, which, when they hadn't tumbled down, brought on news from down below. Brought us news of other soldiers and the victories they won, whilst we sat and grumbled, for our sport had not yet begun. One day the engineers, who were possessed of a balloon, sent the old Chief Monsieur up towards the moon, and it was a spirit-stirring sound to hear his women swear, as they saw their lord and master float gaily through the air. While a missionary murmured as he gazed up in the sky, "How strange that soldiers are the first to send my flock up on high." Whilst deployed in theatre, Fred was promoted to corporal on the 1st of July 1885. In August, on completion of the expedition, the unit returned to Cape Town for around 3 to 4 months, waiting to return home to England. For Fred, that was the end of his foreign adventures, and he returned to England after 1 year and 29 days in South Africa, arriving home on Christmas Eve 1885. Less than 1 year after returning from South Africa, he married Eliza Catherine Cuthbert in St John's Church, Deptford, on the 29th of April 1886. She was 21 years old and he was slightly more mature at 26. Gaining a third-class education in 1887 and a signals qualification in 1889, it's likely that Fred then became an instructor and trainer to new recruits. In 1891, Fred and Eliza were recorded as living in Elms Road, Aldershot. Fred was then promoted to sergeant in September 1893. With a clean medical record and no injuries received in service, Fred then extended with the colours for a further year after completing his obligatory 20 years service. Fred finally left the army in June 1899 after 21 years of service. His conduct was recorded in his papers as exemplary. Now a civilian, Fred began working as a farm bailiff or manager on the Astridge estate in Little Godson. His tasks would have been managing labourers, collecting rent and overseeing the day-to-day operations of the farm. Fred later moved to Brighton, working for a time as an estate bailiff in 1911. The story doesn't end there, however, as Eliza and Fred had 3 sons, William born in 1888, Fred Jr. born in 1891, and Cecil born in 1901. Although there are little details regarding Fred Jr. and Cecil, we learn that William became a bank clerk, working in Aldershot and then emigrating to Canada in 1913. A year later, at the outbreak of World War I, he volunteered for service with the Canadian Forces. Arriving in Europe in October 1914 in the first contingent of the Canadian Expeditionary Force, he served as a sergeant with the 1st Royal Montreal Regiment.
On the 3rd of June 1916, Frederick's son William was shot and wounded in the right shoulder while fighting in Ypres with the Canadian Forces. He was part of the 1st Montreal Royal Regiment and was evacuated to the United Kingdom.
He spent 9 months recovering before remaining in England as a clerk at the depot for the Canadian Army Pay Corps in Buxton, Derbyshire until 1919. During that time, in 1917, he got married to an Englishwoman and afterwards returned to Canada, eventually settling down in Vancouver from 1935. He passed away in 1951, aged 63. His father, Fred, died on the 9th of October 1919 in Little Goddeston, Hertfordshire, England. His son William left for Canada on the 24th of October 1919, so it's likely he attended his funeral. On the National Probate Calendar of 1919, it states Fred left his wife, Eliza, an inheritance of £272, or about £18,000 in today's money. Sadly, Eliza died soon after Fred, on the 5th of February 1920, aged only in her late 50s. With the deaths so close together, it may be safe to speculate that one or both of them succumbed in the great influenza pandemic that was occurring at the time. Approximately 50 million people lost their lives globally in 1918 to 1919 in what became known as the Spanish flu. A quarter of the British population fell ill at some point during the pandemic, and about 228,000 people died. Sadly, I'll have to return the research papers and the medal set back to the owner, but it's been a fascinating journey. There concludes our story of Frederick Crack, a man who fought the Zulus, came under fire in Egypt, and witnessed ballooning in Botswana.